We have talked about what Xamarin is and what are the benefits of using it. And during these past lectures, we mentioned that there are two versions of Xamarin. One is Xamarin Classic and the other is Xamarin Forms. During this video, we're going to cover the differences between one and the other, and when should you use one and when should you use the other. Basically, it's going to be a fight between platform-specific functionality versus code reuse. So let's start talking about how can we identify a Xamarin Classic project. A Xamarin Classic project is going to have the same project structure as you would have in traditional development, and this applies for both Android and iOS. This means that you can bring your previous experience on either Android or iOS and feel right at home when you start using Xamarin Android or Xamarin iOS. Xamarin Classic will also allow you to use native libraries. So if you have a library that is only available in Java for Android, or in the case of iOS on Objective-C, with Xamarin Classic you can actually use those libraries within your Xamarin project using C#. You will also be able to implement platform-specific functionality using Xamarin Classic, and you will still be able to share up to 75% code using Xamarin Classic. In the case of Xamarin Forms, you only have one project, and that one project creates one package for each of the platforms that you're supporting, for example, Android and iOS. In the case of Xamarin Forms, you can share both the logic and the UI while still having native user interfaces. This means that you can define, for example, a button once, and it will be rendered the way it should be rendered according to the platform you're targeting. And Xamarin Forms will even get you to up 100% of code reuse, because in this case, you're also sharing the interface. So let's make the differences a little bit clearer by defining when to use each version. Xamarin Classic is better when you are implementing native interactions. And by native interactions, I just mean that, for example, your app is interacting with other apps that are installed in the same device. Maybe it's interacting with a wallet on iOS, or maybe it's interacting with NFC on Android. Xamarin Classic is also better when you are trying to implement platform-specific APIs. So if your app has to support, for example, Touch ID or 3D Touch on iOS, or again, NFC on Android, then Classic is the way to go. And finally, if customizing the UI is more important than sharing code, then Xamarin Classic is the version of Xamarin that you should choose. On the other hand, however, you can choose Forms if your apps require little platform-specific functionality, and when code sharing is more important than highly customizing the user interface. Let's talk about an example, and these are the actual apps that we're going to be building throughout the course. In the case of Xamarin Classic, we're going to be creating an app that is implementing things like Touch ID and 3D Touch and haptic feedback on iOS. These are platform-specific functionalities. And on Android, we're going to be implementing finger authentication and app shortcuts, again, platform-specific functionality. This app is also going to be using maps and location very heavily. On the other hand, with Forms, we're going to create a very great application as well, but it doesn't have platform-specific functionality. All the functionality is shared across platforms. We want to achieve a very close to 100% of logic and user interface code reuse, so we would choose Xamarin Forms. And finally, the use of maps and location is very light in this example. So once you know a little bit better about the differences between Classic and Forms and when you should choose one above the other, let's, in the next lecture, take a look at the apps that we will be building throughout the entire course.